Thanks for coming by. So I'm going to talk a bit about the specifics around what tech you should probably, what's worth buying these days when it comes to small business. You don't have to own everything anymore. You can actually use a lot of smart services, cloud services and things to kind of take a lot of the weight off. And then you just focus on the key things that you actually might really need in the business. So I think the key question to always remember is to only buy what you really need. That obviously means that knowing what you need is the hard part, is knowing exactly what it is that you really do need to invest in. But it's that key thing that you always have to come back to and make sure you really think about is what is it that you really need to invest in to make sure that you're using the budget you have for tech in the right way. So I think a good thing, and around this time of year where there are a lot of specials and things running, is it's actually good to sort of sample things when they're cheap and sort of test them out. It's not necessarily, when you make your big giant purchases to kind of really make the big investments, but it's a good time for making sure that you can pick up some really good deals, test them out, see if they work, and if they do, then you can spread them a lot further. So there's two main areas that I think are really important to keep in mind for everything that you're investing in now. One is that connectivity is absolutely everything. So this really means that, all the solutions in your business should talk to each other now. I think it's definitely an aspect now that when you're thinking about any tech investment, that products that completely stand alone and don't have some kind of network function can often become a bottleneck for people, and you end up with people having to fight with them and deal with them in different ways, even if it comes to upgrade processes for those devices and their software. When they're networked, so much becomes easier. So it's a really good thing to always keep in mind. I think the other thing is to really think a lot about all the various web solutions and cloud solutions that are available now, because it takes the weight off a small business from caring about the hardware. This is, hardware itself can be a really annoying part of things for a small business if you just don't know how to service those things yourself, how to manage them yourself. So effectively taking that load off and only focusing on the gear that you really need is actually going to make a big difference in the daily routine. And cloud services are something that can also really make all the different gear you have work a lot better. Things like synchronization, backups, all these kinds of elements that you can think about helps a lot. And then on that pure business side, you often talk about CapEx versus OpEx, and I think when you're paying a monthly subscription fee rather than just sort of banging down lots of money for hardware that you won't necessarily utilize, it can make a big difference. So we just really need to always remember that it's a question of productivity within any small business, and I think there's less surplus of productivity in a small business than say in a big business where if a few things go astray here and there, everything load balances over time. I think in a small business you need to make sure that you're getting the productivity question right. So the big thing to always come back to is what is your time really worth? Because so often I hear about people who are fighting with a piece of technology and it's old, but they just keep trying to make it work. I think the question there is, how many of your hours spent fighting with a piece of technology have been wasted, and what are those hours worth, and would it have just been cheaper to have bought something to fix the problem? So there's a really sort of good aspect here that there's a lot of research data around as to how much productivity can be gained or lost through different technology choices. And it's worth taking a look at. A good example is when we talk about giving people multiple monitors on their desk. Again, a lot of people sort of think, oh, should I pay $200 for that extra monitor for somebody? But a lot of the research talks about anywhere from, at the low end, 15%, at the high end, about 80% productivity bonus when you give somebody two monitors to work on, because they're able to sort of keep their email open on one, do their main work on the other, instead of always having to chop and change. So there's good things like that, and if you look at the research and put that dollar value on time, sometimes you can see that a few small investments actually are going to help your business a lot. I think the other big thing is to find the bottlenecks. There are always technology bottlenecks in any business, whether it is fighting with an old printer, whether it is fighting with the network itself, because your router is now really old, or your wireless is still running on on the old sort of B technology and it's just really slow. You know, identify the bottlenecks and then look at what you could buy to actually, you know, open that up and get rid of the problem. And then in the end, it really does come down to just that simple question of how can we get things done, and particularly how do we get more done in the time we have. So there's probably 4 main areas that I think are really worth investing in still to this day. You know, one is the computer, obviously. But I think we see so many people fight with old computers. You know, the computer is the most intimate relationship you have inside a business. You know, people genuinely have a very personal relationship with a computer. But most of the time people hate their computer, and it's a very personal hatred for that machine that just annoys them all the time. If you can give somebody a computer upgrade that actually turns that into a positive relationship and suddenly they fall back in love with the things that a computer lets them do that they otherwise couldn't do without it, that just fundamentally changes someone's outlook on their daily job. And it really can make a big difference in how well they get things done. The hardware is actually quite easy now if you are looking at upgrades, because that entry-level computer now is actually very powerful compared to, you know, maybe there is a 3 or 4 year old computer in your office right now. Oftentimes a lot of the computer manufacturers focus on how much faster this year's computer is to last year's computer, but when you actually do the maths on comparing it to 2 or 3 years ago, you're genuinely talking about 2, 3, 4 times the speed of that sort of much older computer. So you can actually come in really quite cheaply to have a big performance upgrade now for your computers. And then the other thing is to balance the specs to make sure you get the real benefit, because I think a lot of people still often assume, oh, I should buy the biggest hard drive I can buy. And actually that's one of the areas where, you know, moving into cloud and synchronized technology and using centralized storage, it means that each individual computer doesn't have to have space for everything, you know, unless you're letting your staff, you know, or yourself keep vast libraries of movies and music and things on your hard drive. You don't need a 1 terabyte hard drive or even a 500 gigabyte hard drive. I know my main laptop these days only has a 40 gig hard drive, but it's a solid state drive, so it means it works much faster. And I find that the vast majority of things I need don't need to live on the main computer anymore. And then by saving money on the hard drive, and by just going for that really simple mid-tier piece of CPU now, like a Core i5 is sort of the mid-tier of Intel now, it means that you can put that money into more RAM. And I think RAM is the biggest thing that you can put money into in a new computer. RAM is going to, you know, just everyday chores become a lot easier, particularly when somebody's got, you know, 10 different applications open all at once. If you've got plenty of RAM, they can just get on with doing their job. And the big thing about RAM as well is when you buy the computer, if you get that deal in place on the RAM, that's the thing that actually makes the computer a lot more effective on that later part of its life. 2, 3, particularly like 4 years down the track, you might get that extra year out of an older computer because you actually put lots of RAM in it. And that's the big thing that's going to keep it happy even as it's getting to that back end of its lifespan. So the other big thing is networking, and you know, I think that's what really does now, bring everything in a high-tech office together. You want it to be fast and reliable, and I think reliable is the idea that people often attach to the current router they own that's sat there under a bench getting dusty for the past 5 years, and they think, well, it hasn't done anything wrong yet, so how about we just leave it alone and everything should be fine. But I think those 5-year-old routers are often missing a lot of modern features. They're often using a much slower wireless technology, things that really do start to form one of those bottlenecks. So it's really good to take a look at what's new in routers and how can you make sure you buy that upgrade to actually get much better performance. There's a lot of features in modern routers as well where you can, you know, do things like just plug in a USB hard drive and that will be visible to everybody on the network as a piece of central storage. The other part of networking is to actually always put things on a cable, wire them up if you can. You know, wireless is awesome for freedom and, you know, and just for letting people do their thing on laptops. But anywhere that you can plug in to the wired network, you'll have much better performance, and you also free up space to keep the wireless performing at its best as well. So any of the devices you can keep on the wired network, that's always a really, really good choice, because it gives more of that freedom to the wireless users, and it improves the performance of the wired products as well. I sort of mentioned the upgrading wireless as well, and I'm saying it's all about and really. The big thing with networking now isn't, we often, in the debates about things like the NBN, it's always like, oh, but why would we need that much speed? Actually, the biggest thing with any networking now is that we don't want to do one thing really fast. We want to do 50 different things all at once and all at a very good speed. So that's where I think upgrading your network gear can improve that and factor, so that when everybody in the business is trying to do something all at once, no one's slowing each other down. The other aspect is going to be backup and storage. Again, this relies on things like getting your network right, getting your computers right. But backup, I just hate hearing stories about the disaster when everything broke and somebody didn't have a good backup procedure in place. It's particularly devastating for businesses, and actually in some ways even probably personally, emotionally, more devastating for personal users, because of the fact that you will lose these days photos, videos, so many precious memories attached to a computer, and yet most people do not have a genuine backup process in place. With backups, you want it to be automated. It shouldn't be something you have to think about for it to work really well. So that's something to really keep in mind, is find automated synchronization and backup processes. And then you've got the two other questions, is local versus cloud. It is, I think, important for a business to have a centralized internal storage location, network attached storage, or NAS. It's something you'll see a lot these days. Really important to have something like that set up and working well, because you don't want it all just living up in the cloud. If your outside internet connection goes down, well, that's it. You don't have connectivity to your core files. So having a good internal setup there, but then I mentioned here layers of redundancy. You want your main central internal backup to then also have its own backup, because something isn't really backed up if it only lives in one place, and I'd prefer things to live in 3 places at least to feel really comfortable and confident that I've got a really good backup. So I think that's something important. And then the other thing is live versus backup, because it's always good to have one form of backup that is actually completely offline, particularly for a business. A live backup is good when you want to really quickly get to something that has gone missing. But for that total disaster option, when, if you're talking about, fire or theft, or things you want to have one piece of your chain, or even a data corruption, if a virus goes wild, sometimes that can actually propagate into your backups. And if you don't have a backup that's completely separated from your main backup, then you could have serious damage through everything. Another big aspect of things that you do still ultimately need is print and scan. Print and scan really is that, it's kind of that coalface of physical and digital swapping places, and I think more and more we do want everything to stay digital. So print is where you obviously need digital files to become physical so you can share them in different ways. And scan is where you take the physical and you make it digital. I think scan is actually really underutilized in business these days. I think people still feel like when they get that physical copy of something in, they should just file it away somewhere and it sits in a drawer and nobody ever really looks at it again. If you use scan these days, you can use optical character recognition so that it gets scanned in and becomes a searchable PDF document that is now on file in a genuinely useful way. It's something you can find quickly, and it becomes vastly more useful. I think with print, the phrase I like to use is print like you mean it. I think we all like the idea of printing less, but we all know that the paperless office thing just doesn't exist, and it's never going to exist. But I think we should make our choices smarter about how we print, and really think about print as a quality choice as well, rather than a quantity choice. So for me personally, I think with print, I'm actually a big advocate of using original inks, because I've done a lot of my testing myself in labs, as well as sort of seeing things tested by the manufacturers, and there really are quite distinct differences in and what you get out at the other end when you use original inks. A classic example is when you're printing in color, you can see a bleed between yellow and black colors when you use generic inks, and it's something that can be quite important if you're trying to file a really sleek presentation. And I think the network features are a really big win for both scan and print as well. Printing these days, again, it is something in the HP printers at the moment, is where you can email a document from anywhere outside of your business. If you email a document to be printed, it can actually be really, really useful. So I think that's kind of a few of those key areas. And the other thing is just accessories, to think about your accessories, use it to enhance the gear you have, because in a lot of ways computers are great, but when you get the right accessories, even things like, that second monitor, a good keyboard, so someone feels comfortable using it, and then power management is one of those accessories. There's both cost savings and general, savings for the gear that you're using as well. And then finally, the home office. Always don't forget about that as well. I think that's an important part of that. A good example is buy a second power adapter for your printer, because for your laptop, so that you're not lugging all your gear back and forth between the home office and the main office. You don't want to carry things around if you don't have to. So just to kind of close out, we're talking about the kind of bargain side of things at this time of year. I think there's only two kinds of money. It's either been well used or wasted. So always do your due diligence on any bargains to make sure it's going to be useful, and it is that good sampling opportunity to test things out, see if they work for you, and will help you out. And it is a good time to maximize when you do have a limited budget and you know what you need. But that's it. When you're spending money on your tech, you just try to make sure that it actually counts when you do it. And that's all from me for now. Thanks.